Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology. My name is Rachel, and I'm a Senior Qualitative Research Mentor here at Statistics Solutions. I also have Isades with me in the background today, just in case of any technical difficulties, and then also to answer any questions that come in about what we do here at Statistics Solutions. So we are a full service dissertation editing and consulting company. And that means that we are here to help graduate students like yourselves through really all stages of the dissertation process. So that could be from the very beginning and helping with topic development all the way through to providing support for your final PowerPoint and dissertation defense. So we are here to help. We have all been through the process, so we know what it's like. We use a really team-based approach to sort of customize what we can do for you. So this webinar will be part webinar for the first portion of it, and then I will leave some time at the end for question and answers. So if there are questions that come in during the webinar that are related more to the services that we provide and our company, Isades will field those during the webinar. And then if there are questions that are webinar specific, content related, I will get those answered at the end of today's session. So again, my name is Rachel. I'm a Senior Qualitative Research Mentor here at Statistics Solutions. So a lot of what I do is working with graduate students on their qualitative dissertations. And so that includes helping determine what the best, most appropriate research design might be for your dissertation, and then helping out with data analysis once you get to the results chapter. So one of the questions that I get really most frequently is, how do I know if a qualitative design, if a qualitative method is right for me? And the answer to that is it really is going to depend on your research problem and purpose that you have identified and the research questions that you're asking. So this is really specific to your project, but everything needs to be in alignment. And so the first step in your introduction is identifying what the research problem is, and from there, developing the purpose of your research, right? And then your research questions. So how will you get all of this addressed? And then comes the research design and what's most appropriate. So this webinar is about research design and methodology. Now, the methodology chapter typically includes these sections. Okay. Now, I will say, and I will try to remind you as we go along through the webinar, that not every school, not every department, not every reviewer, committee chair requires each of these sections. And so while I have compiled this list over the years that I have worked with other graduate students, these are the sections that I most commonly see in a methods chapter. Always default to what your school requires of you. Okay, now it may be that you are here because you don't know what your school requires of you. They have provided no template, no checklist, no guidance whatsoever. And if that's the case, you're in the right place. We will talk about each of these sections. And if you include all of these sections, even if you find out later on that you don't need all of them, you've got a really thorough draft of your chapter to work with. Okay. And you can rest assured that you have everything that you need, even if it's more than what is required by your school. So most typically, the schools where the clients that I have worked with come from require an introduction, a section on the research design, and that includes a rationale for that research design, a section on the role of the researcher, that is you, a section about the methodology, one on issues of trustworthiness, and then a summary. So we will kind of in this webinar take a higher level overview of what should be included in each of these sections so that you have a good idea of, when you're working on your own methods chapter, what needs to go into each section. So in your introduction, as is very standard with any of your other chapters, you will include an introductory statement, an introduction section, where you restate the purpose of your study. Now, this is not the place to get creative. Okay, your study has one purpose, and that's the one that you have identified in your introduction, in your introductory chapter, chapter 1. Okay, and so here you can literally copy and paste. Okay, it should be verbatim, the exact same purpose, and really everywhere in your dissertation that you state the purpose of your study needs to be written verbatim. It needs to be written exactly the same way. And the reason for this is that even slight changes to your language may have implications for your study, for the purpose, for the design, for the method. So it's really important to use the same wording every single time you state the purpose of your study. Okay. Now, doing this also helps remind the reader of what your study is about. Okay, so I like to take the approach as I'm writing that we hold our reader's hand as we go along. There are no surprises. We don't wait till the end for a big reveal. We state everything up front. Okay, so your reader has probably already read your first and second chapters. We're on to the methods chapter. And this is a friendly reminder of, hey, my dissertation is about this. This is the purpose. Okay. And then you want to give a preview, just a little snapshot of what is to come in the chapter. So those sections that I outlined in the previous slide, you will mention those. Okay. So again, think about holding the reader's hand. Here's what I have outlined that I'm going to do. Here's the purpose of my study. And then here's what I'm going to talk about in this chapter. Okay, just to provide a roadmap orientation for your reader. Most typically, your next section will have something to do with your research design. And in this section, you want to restate your research questions again, verbatim, as they have appeared anywhere else you have stated them, maybe in your introduction chapter, maybe you have mentioned them again in your literature review, but you always want to use exactly the same language, exactly the same words. Okay, so you restate your research questions. Again, think holding your reader's hand. Okay, then you want to identify and define whatever it is that you are studying. Is it a phenomenon? Are you conducting a phenomenological study? Are you doing a case study? If so, what is the case? Okay, what is the concept that you're studying? Okay, identify that very clearly for the reader, because this chapter is essentially building your case for a particular research design. Okay, here's what I'm studying. Here's the phenomenon or case or concept. And then here are the methods that I'm going to use to explore that. Okay, so you want to identify and define whatever it is that you are studying. You want to identify the tradition. So are you conducting a qualitative study or a quantitative study? Okay, maybe a lot of you are in here because you are thinking about a qualitative study. Okay, maybe you're leaning toward quantitative, but you want to identify that for the reader. And then you also want to identify whatever your specific research design is. And so because this is a qualitative methods webinar, we'll talk about qualitative methods and design here. So you'll identify that you are conducting a qualitative study and the specific design that you are using. So is it a case study? Is it a phenomenological study? Are you conducting a rapid ethnographic assessment? Okay. Whichever design you're using, you want to identify that. And there are a couple of reasons why this is important and why you need to include a detailed description of this in this section. So the first part of this has to do with you are showing ultimately, your reader, but also your dissertation committee and your dissertation chair, that you are familiar with different research designs, different research approaches, with the difference between qualitative and quantitative studies, okay? And that you have a good understanding of sort of what the basics of these can do, why they might be appropriate for different studies. So you need to demonstrate your familiarity with and your understanding of this sort of array of possibilities of research designs, okay? But you also need to be able to make the case, justify why the design that you have selected is the most appropriate, again, when we're thinking about alignment, to address your research problem, purpose, and research questions. Okay, so in order to best justify the design that you have selected as the most appropriate, you need to show why the others are not appropriate for your study. And to be able to do so, you need to show that you understand what they are good for and what they aren't. Okay, so you are, again, demonstrating that you have a basic working knowledge of these different qualitative designs. And this doesn't have to be super in-depth, just enough to show you know what you're talking about. And then to justify why the design that you've selected is the most appropriate to address your research problem. Now, you might be asking, why would we use a qualitative design? Well, qualitative designs are really good when you're working with textual data. Okay, so quantitative studies, you're looking at a lot of numbers, hypothesis testing, statistics, and we're not doing that in qualitative research. Okay, think, interviews, focus groups, a lot of textual data. We're analyzing words, what people say, in some cases, how people say things. Okay, so if in your purpose statement, there's something about exploring participants' perspectives or experiences, these are sort of those words that might clue you into, well, maybe this would be a qualitative study. Okay, qualitative designs are really helpful for understanding participants' experiences, okay, and their perspectives of experiences, because we can talk to them, we can collect textual data. Oftentimes for data collection, like I said, we use interviews and focus groups. We might also use documents, collect documents and analyze those documents. We might conduct observations, say we're doing a workplace study and it's appropriate to observe our participants in the workplace, right? Maybe taking structured notes of very specific things that you have, aspects of the workday that you've identified that you want to observe and know more about. Okay, all of this yields textual data. So data collection, there are a lot of different ways to do this in qualitative research. Okay, our goal is not necessarily to generalize. And this is another way that this really differs from quantitative research. Quantitative research does involve some degree of generalization, power analysis, ensuring that there's the right number of participants so that a statistic, a finding is perhaps more generalizable, but that isn't always the case with qualitative studies. It might be that the findings are unique to your participants. It might be that your findings are generalizable to other people who have undergone the same experience, but not necessarily. Okay. Again, we don't conduct hypothesis testing. We don't quantify our results, generally speaking, in qualitative research. So there are a lot of good applications of qualitative research, but you need to be able to demonstrate an understanding of sort of the differences overall in why we would use a qualitative approach versus a quantitative. So I want to touch a little bit on some basic qualitative research designs. The first three, case studies, phenomenological studies, and generic qualitative studies, are the ones that I see most commonly in the clients that I work with. Okay. However, this list is not exhaustive. There are many other qualitative research designs to select from. Okay. Grounded theory, ethnography are others that I do see from time to time. But again, the most common that I see are these first three. So we'll talk just briefly about each of them. Okay. So a case study is really, really helpful when you are looking at a very specific example of something in depth and perhaps over time. Okay. So examples would be, as I sort of have here, an atypical case, an exemplary case, a case that presents a counterpoint or provides a new direction for a study. So let's say that you are interested in studying a new curriculum that has been implemented in a school district, into high schools in a school district. Okay. And maybe you're looking at it's a 12th grade English curriculum. Okay. And so in your research, what you have found in your background research is that, say, 8 of the high schools in the school district have improved student performance because they've implemented this new curriculum, but 1 high school is still lagging. Okay, so this is an atypical case, right? Because it hasn't done what was expected. All of the other high schools have improved student performance, but this one hasn't. So a case study might be a good design for this because it'll allow you to go really in depth to understand what's happening with this one school. Okay. Now, you might conduct a multiple case study. Okay. So maybe it's the case that you have the same high school district and 2 of the schools all of the schools have improved student performance, but 2 of them have improved it just above and beyond the others. And you want to find out what's going on with those 2. So maybe you conduct a multiple case study. And in this case, the cases might be the different high schools, those 2 high schools. So 1 case each. They're bound by this common uniting factor. Okay. That is, they have implemented this curriculum and something is going on that is really enhanced student performance in these 2 schools. Okay. So you get a really in-depth look, and you get this in-depth look, this in-depth exploration by using multiple data collection methods. Okay, this is really kind of the hallmark of the case study, is you're not just conducting interviews, which is, I think, often what we think of when we think about qualitative research methods and data collection. You might interview teachers. Okay, you might interview the students. Okay, if they're seniors, maybe they're above 18, and heck, you just fly through IRB. You might do some document analysis, looking at the curriculum and the materials that have been implemented. You might look at observations. You might conduct observations with these 2 classes that are really outperforming everyone. And you might also collect observations from the other classes that aren't doing so well. Okay, but what it gets you is this deep, multifaceted, rich look at the case to understand what is going on and why and how. Okay, and to hopefully identify patterns or themes that emerge from studying these cases. Okay, so the in-depth study, the case study, can be really, really helpful. in, if your purpose sounds something like that. So phenomenological studies are different from case studies. They're also qualitative research designs, but this is where we are exploring the lived experiences of participants. So phenomenology has its roots in philosophy and also psychology. Okay. And so where I see people struggle with phenomenology is making sure that it's connected, that their phenomenological studies are connected back to the psychology. Okay. How participants assign meaning to an experience. Okay. And understanding that meaning. So there's the act of going through the experience, but there's how do participants make sense of this? What's meaningful about this to them? And so, unlike with case studies, usually in phenomenology, we conduct in-depth interviews. And so when I say in-depth, I'm not talking about a 15-minute interview one time with each participant. We're talking about something that might be 60 to 90 minutes, and you might conduct multiple interviews with the same participants. Okay. You want to keep them talking. You're trying to understand their lived experience of a phenomenon. Okay. So you can see just how much textual data these can yield. Okay. So interviews are kind of the key data collection method for phenomenological studies. And the idea here is to show what the common structure of that phenomenon is. Okay, that experience that all of the participants have been through, that there's an essence to that phenomenon. Okay, that there are key aspects of it that everyone goes through, and how they make meaning, how your participants make meaning of that. Okay, so this is very different from the case study. Now, it is not always the case that your study is going to fall neatly into a design or call for a phenomenological or a case study approach. And so in these cases, I think that a generic qualitative design can really fit the bill. Now, most of us hear the term generic, and I think it conjures up negative connotations. I have certainly heard in the past, either webinar attendees or even my clients have said, that their chairs really don't like the generic qualitative design, that it's not good enough, that it's not a rigorous method. And that is absolutely untrue. Okay. The generic qualitative design is very, very helpful when your, again, research problem, purpose, and research questions do not call specifically for a case study or an ethnography or grounded theory. Okay. So maybe we're less concerned in understanding the meaning that participants make of an experience. And we just want to know what the experience is like, sort of the outward focus. Okay. So we're not really getting into the psychology of what it's like to go through an experience. And so in this case, a generic study might be the most appropriate. Okay. Or you might be conducting a mixed methods study where you do incorporate some quantitative elements. So a generic qualitative design might be helpful here. But the qualitative design is helpful when there are aspects of other designs, but your study doesn't fit neatly into one of those. Okay, so you can sort of choose from different data collection techniques. So any that I've already mentioned: interviews, questionnaires, focus groups, surveys, observations, document analysis, really any of those. But again, it's not that you're just sort of like throwing data collection techniques at the wall and seeing what sticks. It all has to make sense in terms of the alignment of your study. Okay, but it allows you greater flexibility with the design. And so it helps to understand this outward or outer world content. Okay, so less the psychology and more the outer experience. Okay, and I put this reference in here, Percy and colleagues, because it is one of the best sources that I have found to help my clients really justify using a generic qualitative design, especially if your chairs don't think that this is sort of an okay or rigorous design. Now, less commonly, like I said, I see a couple of other designs. I see grounded theory occasionally, and I see ethnography occasionally. So grounded theory and ethnography really are both sort of more associated with specific disciplines. Okay, grounded theory, we do see a lot in some of the social sciences like sociology, anthropology. And grounded theory is really helpful when we don't know a whole lot about a topic. Okay, and there's not maybe a good theoretical or conceptual framework available for understanding that topic. And so grounded theory, as it sort of sounds, is the production of theory or generating theory from your data, from your participants and their perspectives and their experiences. Okay, so instead of starting off your study, framing it with a theoretical framework or a conceptual framework, this comes at the end. The goal is to explore the experiences, okay, and then develop an overarching framework that explains what's going on. Okay, so I caution against this for novice researchers. It takes time. It takes quite a bit of time, which also means that it can take money. Okay, and it's helpful to have a bit more research experience before diving into grounded theory. It involves interviews. It may involve some degree of field work, text or document analysis, a lot of sort of memoing, thinking on paper, writing, theoretical saturation. And it is done by simultaneously collecting and analyzing data. And so the idea is that you do some interviews with people who have experience with, the topic, sort of start to get an idea of the experience. You analyze the data from those interviews. You find some more participants, conduct some more interviews. And so it's this really back and forth kind of cyclical process until you reach a point where you're not learning anything new about the experience. Okay. And so again, the goal here is to produce theory, broad explanation, okay, that is grounded in the data. Okay. So it explains the data that you have collected. And ethnography, again, like I said, this one is really tied pretty specifically to anthropology and then also to sociology as well. And that doesn't mean that it can't be used in other disciplines. Absolutely. But ethnography is really helpful for when we want to understand a problem within sort of the broader cultural or societal context. Okay, so it involves more of a holistic inquiry where the researcher is really kind of embedded in that culture, okay, or in that maybe social group. So the goal then is to really understand what it's like kind of to be someone else. You want to understand your participants' perspectives, but really gain this understanding for yourself of what it's like to be them and why they have these perspectives. So we conduct interviews, extended field work, and participant observation, conversations with people. And again, I don't see this as commonly because ethnography takes quite a lot of time. It doesn't have to. And more recently, ethnography, it can be done in a matter of a few months, but historically, we're talking about data collection in the field, by which I mean, likely somewhere far from home, for a year or even 2 years at a time. Okay, so all of these, of course, are considerations as well when you're talking about your doctoral journey. And ethnography produces an in-depth account of the research problem, okay, from the perspective of participants, but in this larger holistic cultural context, okay? So after your research design, okay, where you outline whichever of those 5 that I've talked about at this point, you want to outline your role as the researcher. And I know you might be asking, well, isn't research supposed to be, objective and unbiased and all of that? And, no, is my short answer. But you have a role in your research. Even if you're conducting a quantitative study, you play a role as the researcher. And so in qualitative research, more and more, I think we're starting to see that we need to acknowledge what that role is. Okay, we do have biases. We bring biases to the table, to our research. That's just what we do. And so we talk about how we mitigate those, but it's important to be upfront about what these might be. Okay, so you talk about your role in the research. Are you just an observer? Okay, are you conducting ethnography where you're also participating in, events, functions that are important to your participants? Are you both? Okay, what are you doing in your research? You want to talk about any potential conflicts of interest that you might have between you and your participants. Okay, let's say you're the principal of a school and you want to conduct a study with teachers at your school. Okay, that's going to be difficult to get through your IRB. But if you do, you need to be able to identify that there is some power differential there. There's a potential conflict of interest. You are in a position of authority over your participants. Okay, what biases do you bring to your research? How do you plan to mitigate those? Okay, identify how you will do that. And then any other applicable ethical issues. So, do you work at the study site? Are you the principal at a school where you're conducting your research? All of this needs to be made very, very clear so that the reader has a good understanding of how you may impact your study. Okay, we all impact our studies. We all impact our research as researchers. Okay, that is unavoidable, but we can take steps to mitigate that. And it's really important just to be upfront and clear about how that might happen. In your methodology section, you will talk more about your participants. So the overall population is the group of people from which you will draw your sample. Okay. You'll want to mention your sampling strategy. And so in qualitative study, we don't use random sampling so much. We use purposive, or sometimes you will hear purposeful sampling. And this is because oftentimes, we are studying something very specific. We're researching something very specific, an experience. Okay. And so we want to make sure that the participants in our study have gone through that experience, right? So if we're randomly sampling, we might get participants who have not been through the experience. So you need to meet some criteria. And so your inclusion criteria should outline those characteristics that people must meet in order to participate in your study. Okay, so again, if we go back to our 12th grade English literature implementing new curriculum study, okay, you could think through what the characteristics of your participants might look like. They would need to be 12th grade English teachers. They would need to be in the school district under study. They would need to have implemented this new curriculum. Okay, maybe it is important that they have been teaching at the school for a certain number of years. So all of this has to be outlined, okay, in this section. And then you'll need to talk too about how you will verify that with each participant before they actually enroll in your study? How will you verify that they meet these characteristics? Okay. You'll talk about the number of participants, and if you're conducting a case study, the number of cases. Okay. Outline very specifically how you plan to identify, contact, and recruit your participants. This is an area where I see a lot of times my clients don't think that they have to be as specific as they really do. You got to get into the nitty gritty here. Okay. So outlining, and really think of it as, it might be helpful to write out, step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then put that into narrative format once you have the steps written out. Okay. And then you want to talk about the size of your sample and how that relates to data saturation. Okay. And that is the point at which you are no longer receiving new information, new data. So if you have conducted, 12 interviews, you've analyzed those interviews, and by the 9th interview, you realize that you're not learning anything new, your data are very likely saturated. And so with more interviews, you're likely to not learn new information. You'll include a section on instrumentation. So all of your data collection instruments, okay? An interview protocol that lists your sort of opening, greeting, and announcement of who you are, and all of the interview questions to ensure that you're asking the same questions of all of your participants. If you're conducting structured classroom observations, okay, again, what are those aspects of the classroom that you will be focused on specifically? So you might have an observation sheet. Okay, the source for each instrument. So a lot of times we create our own interview protocols, but sometimes we might use something that's already published. So you want to talk about if you're going to create your own. Okay, and if so, how are you determining, say, the questions that you're going to ask your participants? And if you're using something already published, here you'd want to talk about why you're doing that, why it's most appropriate, and then also mention that you have permission to do so. Okay. If you are conducting some type of document review and document analysis, you want to identify the source of those documents and how you'll verify their accuracy. Okay, where did they come from? How do you know that this is a legitimate, accurate source? Okay, and then demonstrate how each of your data sources will address your research questions. And sometimes it's helpful to think of this and maybe put this into a table where you sketch out, if you have 3 research questions, maybe research question 1 will be answered by the interviews that you're conducting. And maybe your second research question will be answered by a document review and analysis. And the third will be answered by observations. Okay. But including all of that in this section really bolsters the section. For each of your instruments, okay, and so it might be that you're just conducting interviews, but it might be that you're collecting data through these other sources. For each instrument, you want to provide each of these following details. Okay, so where you will collect the data. Okay, and right now it might be, from your home office via Zoom because, things are still kind of changing and we're not fully, out and about anymore. Or maybe, you'll conduct interviews at a library, okay, in like a private room in a library. Who will collect the data? Do you have a research assistant? Will that person be conducting the interviews or will it be you? The frequency of data collection, the duration of data collection, how you plan to record your data, and then, and this is really important, your contingency plans in case people drop out. So loss to attrition. And this almost always happens in a research study. So you want to make plans to ensure that you do get the number of participants that you wanted. Okay. Any debriefing procedures and any follow-up procedures. So you'll outline all of that. You'll include a section on how you plan to analyze your data. Okay, and so for each data type, and again, it might just be interviews, but you might be conducting, collecting data through different techniques. And so for each of those, you want to talk about how those data are going to address your research questions, as I mentioned, and how you plan to analyze those data. So what type of coding process procedures are you going to use? Will it be a thematic analysis? Are you conducting an interpretative phenomenological analysis? Are you using cyclical coding? There are lots of different types of qualitative analyses available. Okay, so it needs to, again, this is something where you would want to sort of start with, maybe a general textbook and then dig a little bit deeper into different analysis approaches and determine what is the most appropriate for your study. Any software that you plan to use, there is a lot of really great qualitative software available to qualitative researchers that can really help with not analysis. You do the analysis as the researcher, but help you organize and visualize your data. Okay, and keep track of all of it, and then how you'll handle discrepant cases or those instances where, 10 of your participants all show a similar pattern and one of them is just totally different. What are you going to do with that? And so you talk about that here, how that factors into your analysis. You'll include a section on trustworthiness. And so this is sort of the how we know our data are, valid. Okay, so credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So are our findings accurate? Okay, how much confidence do we have that they're accurate? Are they applicable to findings from other contexts? Okay, maybe a different population, maybe a different work site. Okay, can we transfer those findings? They help us understand a different context. Are they replicable? Right? So could you do the same study? Could you conduct the same study in a different context and come up with the same findings? Okay, that's the dependability. And confirmability is ensuring that the findings are based on what your participants say and not sort of what you think. Okay, there is a degree of interpretation in a lot of this, right? But we do also need to make sure that our findings are based in what our participants have provided us, those data. So there are different ways to establish trustworthiness. And in this section, you'll just talk about, I always recommend, one paragraph for each, sort of talking about, okay, what is credibility? And then here's how I'm going to establish this in my own study. And so things like an audit trail, member checking, triangulation, these can all be really helpful for establishing trustworthiness in a study. And ethical procedures, of course. So if you are conducting a qualitative study and you're sort of at the IRB stage of things, you are probably familiar with a lot of the ethical training, the Belmont report, city training, to ensure that you are not harming people when you work with human participants, because that is so much of qualitative research. So in this section of the chapter, you would want to talk about any permissions, agreements that you have to conduct your research. So you want to talk about obtaining IRB approval from your school. Perhaps, again, you're conducting a study in a school district and they have their own separate approval process. You want to talk about how you have obtained that permission to use the school as a site of research or another work site as a site of research. Okay, any agreements in terms of how you will gain access to your participants and the data. How you will treat human participants. So again, it's the beneficence and justice and, all of that related to the Belmont report. So not just the permissions, but ethical considerations related to recruitment and data collection. So ensuring that you are not approaching possible participants in public in front of a lot of people and saying, hey, would you like to be in my study, right? Because that could violate this principle of confidentiality. Okay. Because other people then might know that they're participating in your study. Related to data collection, making sure that you're collecting data in a private location. If you are conducting interviews from your home, making sure that you're doing that in a private area where no one else in the home can hear. Okay. And then how you plan to treat those data, how you plan to maintain confidentiality so that no one knows who your study participants are. So in qualitative research, the data of the participants are not anonymous. That would mean that we have no idea who our participants are, and that's not the case. Okay, so what we can do is maintain their confidentiality. And so again, this is, a section where you want to get down to the nitty gritty of, talking about like, I will keep data in an encrypted file in my password protected computer, or, a locked filing cabinet. And I'm the only one who has a key to the filing cabinet. It's kind of that level of detail, how you will secure your data. Okay. And then how you will destroy it after a specified period of time. And so a lot of times this is 5 years, but most schools outline how long you should retain those data after the study is completed and written up and your dissertation is submitted. And so in the summary, really just like any other chapter, you want to recap and again, think about pull the reader along. What were the key points? Okay, that you touched on in the chapter. So again, sort of think alignment, problem purpose, research questions, methods, and methodology. Okay. And then transition to your next chapter, which will likely be your results chapter. So this chapter can be intimidating. And I get that. And this is what I see a lot in my clients. It's hard to know where to start. And I think that's because it is so different from the first and second chapters. The introduction and the literature review require something different of you as a researcher. But here you are in the planning stage and you are planning for something that you haven't done yet. So you have to think through a lot of different scenarios. Okay. And, we tend to be perfectionists. And so there are a lot of what ifs, right? What if it doesn't go this way? What if it doesn't go that way? What if it doesn't turn out the way I wanted it to? What if I can only, recruit 8 participants and I wanted 12? Okay, well, you know what? What if? That cannot stop you from writing this chapter is the thing. Okay, you just have to do it because things are going to change and that's perfectly fine. When things change, you talk about them later. Okay, if you only ended up recruiting 8 participants and you said that you were going to recruit 12. Well, you know what? That might be a limitation. It might impact your results. Okay. But that's fine. You discuss that in chapter 5 as a limitation. So what? No big deal. Right. So there are a lot of what ifs, and you are thinking through something that, you haven't done yet. Okay. But it doesn't have to be scary. Okay, it doesn't have to be daunting, intimidating. Start with your problem and your purpose and your research questions. Okay, and like I said, I think, lists and tables can be really helpful in this preliminary drafting stage. Ask yourself, what data do I need to answer these to address your problem, purpose, and research questions? Who do I need to talk to find the answers? What documents might give me the answers? What observations might give me the answers? Okay, and go from there. Think of it as a recipe. Okay, a recipe has 2 parts. It has the ingredients and the instructions. Okay, well, your methods chapter has your methods or the ingredients and your methodology or the instructions. Okay, you can't make a successful methods chapter without the ingredients and the instructions, just like you can't make successful chocolate chip cookies that taste yummy without both parts. Okay, you need to know the ingredients, but you also need to tell the reader how you're using those ingredients. Okay. Methods and methodology change. They just do. Okay. Think about everybody who is, working on their dissertation right now, working on their methods chapter, and had to completely rework their plans for data collection because we found ourselves in the middle of a pandemic. Okay. It just happens. It's life. We're human beings and we are working with human beings. So give yourself grace that what you put into this chapter might change and that that is okay. Okay. Remember, I said come up with contingency plans for what you might do if you lose participants, right? Plan for, the worst case, right? But know that it's okay if things change. Don't let the what ifs stop you from just getting the chapter done and moving on with your life. So if you are still stuck and having trouble, that's why we're here to help. Again, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. And our goal here is to help you finish your dissertation because you've been working on it for too long. You've spent too much money. You spent too much time on it. Okay. We can provide you with timely support to help get you done as quickly as possible. We provide a complimentary 30-minute consultation. Okay. And in order to schedule that, you can call us, you can email info@statisticsolutions.com. You can self-schedule through our website. And the purpose of that call is to really get a chance to talk to you more about your own study, your own needs, any sticking points that you have, and how we can best help you out. Okay. Our website is statisticsolutions.com. There is an entire array of other resources that are available. We have a blog. We have a number of tools for everything from your introduction to your discussion chapters. Okay. Qualitative, quantitative, lit review, you name it, we've got it. That's all available to you. But again, the website, you can also schedule the complimentary consultation so that we can talk more with you about your own unique dissertation needs. You'll also find the webinar schedule. So we do provide webinars on a lot of other topics related to the dissertation, and you can add those to your calendar. You can register for those through our website as well. So I do have some questions now in the last couple of minutes. The first question, I'm just going to answer these in the order that they came in, but the first question is about, is generic design considered either inductive analysis or content analysis? No, it's not. You can use an inductive analysis or analytic approach, or you could use content analysis with a generic design. But a generic design is the sort of broader overall flexible design that allows you to select what data collection methods might be most appropriate for your study and what analytic approaches might be most appropriate as well. So the next question is, can you do research at the organization you're at if the IRB approves it and still revise and publish your reworked dissertation after the school publishes it? Or does the conflict of interest prohibit you from publishing later? I can't answer that question definitively, but I know that it is very most common for graduate students to publish any number of articles in academic journals that are based on their dissertation work. So the next question is, if completing observations, how do you identify and discuss when you may be changing roles between observer versus participant? So, this is a good question. I think, if you're participating in something, think about if you, I don't know, you're conducting something on a particular religious organization or church. Okay. And it would be the difference between, are you observing a church service or are you participating in the church service? So I think that becomes more clear as you're actually conducting the research. The next question is about, how do you make, verify, validate, or prove credentials, trustworthiness, reliability for qualitative instruments? So this is sort of best accomplished by using what we might call an expert panel, but you could also do some kind of test run. So if you are developing, say, your own interview protocol, it can be very helpful to have members of your committee or content experts review those questions to ensure that they will yield data to address your research purpose. It can also be really helpful to test your interview questions with members of the overall population from which you're drawing the sample, but not your actual participants. Okay. This can provide absolutely invaluable feedback. This is what happened to me. I thought I had a really good handle on how I was asking my questions. And I started off, doing kind of test runs with people who weren't my participants, but certainly were members of that population. And learned very quickly that I wasn't asking the questions in the right way, or the questions just didn't make sense culturally. So that's sort of the best way to handle that. I have a question about, let's see. So, okay, when you say one paragraph for credibility, transferability, et cetera, and your ethical procedures like IRB, et cetera, how detailed do you need to be? Do you need to go step by step and extreme detail, or just give enough detail to show you've done your due diligence? Again, for the section on trustworthiness and each of those paragraphs, I would say enough detail to show you've done your due diligence. Again, just sort of like we talked about with the approaches and designs, you want to convey that you know what you're talking about, right? With ethical procedures, this is where it's really helpful to go step by step. And even if you don't need the little sort of detail and minutia in your methods chapter, it will make your IRB application so much easier because you already have the steps written down. Okay, so the more detail you can provide is sort of always better, and you're doing yourself a huge favor. The you that is applying for IRB approval will thank the you that wrote your methods chapter. Okay, since Zoom and Skype and other such programs have access to the data since it goes through the network, can you prove that you've actually met ethical considerations, or how do you get around that sort of thing? I've actually never encountered that as a problem. I mean, never say never, but certainly in the context of kind of the pandemic and everybody using Zoom, I have not happened upon this particular problem. Probably you cannot prove it. But if you are pulling recordings from the cloud, so that they're not necessarily stored in Zoom, so that they're stored on local computer, password protected. And even with Zoom, right, you're probably password protected there. So it's just showing that you are taking all of the precautions that you can to ensure that the data are safe and confidential. Difference between method and methodology. So like I said, I liken this to a recipe with ingredients and instructions. So your methods are the ingredients. Okay, so if you're making chocolate chip cookies, you have a cup of flour, and I don't really know what all goes into chocolate chip cookies other than some kind of flour and chocolate chips, and you've got your milk and eggs and, all of that. But none of that means anything without the instructions, and that's the methodology part. So it's how do you put all of this together, right? How do you put the cup of flour and however many eggs and however much milk together? Okay, so I think if you think of it as the two parts and that you need both parts, that will be the most helpful. I have another question about, should we go back to the participant and ask for them to clarify their responses a few days later? Yes, I think this is always a good idea. If you have transcripts from interviews, it can be really, really helpful to have your participants check their transcripts for clarity. And this also gives them the opportunity to, do any editing if they want to remove anything from their responses, if they want to add anything, maybe we all think of something later, right? The brilliant idea comes to us long after the conversation. Maybe your participants have experienced this, and so now they have information that they want to add. They can go ahead and do that during the transcript verification. So I think it's always a good idea to do that. A lot of times they unfortunately won't, but it's a good idea too. So critical discourse analysis, can I use documents only, and could I achieve triangulation by using it? So you can use documents only. Yes, that's not that's not an issue. Triangulation means a lot of different things, and so if you are using documents but they're from different sources or different people, that in itself could be a form of triangulation. Okay. As a novice, which type of study do I recommend? As a novice, what I recommend, for those just getting started with research, is making sure that you have a problem, purpose, and research questions that are all in alignment, and that you understand enough of qualitative and quantitative approaches and designs to be able to articulate which one is most appropriate for your specific study. So it's, it really depends on your study. Okay, I've got 2 more questions and then we will have to break. I'm sorry, I do recognize that we're just a couple of minutes over time. The next question is using interpretative phenomenological analysis, that the researcher, this participant, is a member of the population, but using researcher journaling to bracket. Do I need to bracket in the same way so this goes into a couple of different types of, different types and different approaches to phenomenological studies. So my short answer is no. If you are a member of the population, it's sort of assumed that you do have this knowledge, okay, and this experience, but because it's interpretative, there's also the recognition that you are interpreting your participants and their responses and their data. So yes, you want to be clear about that and maybe do some bracketing, some journaling, writing down your thoughts, but there's a little more leeway here because there is the acknowledgement that, this gets filtered through you as the researcher and your own unique perspective. And then I think this was just a quick follow-up question to these. Should we go back and, check with our participants about their interview responses? If they change their answer a lot, what to do? So if they change their answer a lot, I would use the updated, say, transcript, for example, but it is sometimes worth talking about how their responses changed and perhaps why, if you know the answer. So that would all be kind of data that could be included. So again, everyone will receive a copy of this webinar and also a copy of the slides. So you have our contact information. Don't forget, we do provide a complimentary consultation. So we are available to help you at any stage of your dissertation journey. Thank you so much for spending this hour. And again, I'm sorry, we're a little bit over an hour and 5 minutes with me this afternoon. I wish you the best of luck. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.